You're listening to Yonder Lies. I'm Hannah Haberman. Today we're going to be tackling a myth that centers on the gap between popular perception and lived reality here in Jackson. If you've spent some time in Jackson, you've hopefully heard of Munger Mountain, a local K-5 public school just a little bit south of town. Munger opened just 2 years ago in 2018, which is pretty exciting on its own. But what's perhaps more exciting, and maybe surprising, is that Munger Mountain is a dual immersion Spanish-English school. And if we're operating on stereotyped narratives of what kind of town Jackson is, maybe what a tourist might see walking through town square or looking at local ads and pictures in magazines, this fact is pretty dissonant. In what can often appear like a hyper-white, non-Spanish-speaking town, the reality that there's a Spanish dual immersion school in Jackson might feel a little counterintuitive to some. Things become a little less dissonant when you throw in this fact, that according to the American Community Survey conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau, roughly 25% of Jackson's population identifies as Hispanic as of 2017. And that's likely a low estimate given the tendency for undercounting in demographic surveys. This fact, this 25%, is almost always surprising to non-Latino people who are new to this community, and even to some who've been here a long, long time. It was definitely surprising to me. And the fact that it's surprising points directly to the space between a pervasive myth about this place and the actual lived reality of this town. And this dissonance feels indicative of a changing and changed Jackson. Today, we're excited to share the perspectives of two Jackson community members that dive into and debunk this myth. First, we'll hear from Alina Indracas, a 28-year-old who grew up in Jackson and now works for 122. In the second half of our episode, we'll hear from Lina, a writer, photographer, translator, and manager of the Family Literacy Program at the Teton Literacy Center. I was able to sit down and talk, via Zoom, to Alina Indraca, who spent the majority of her childhood in Jackson and now works at 122, a local organization that provides resources and support to community members in need of assistance of all demographics. Talking to Alina was equal parts enjoyable and thought-provoking. I met her very cute dog, and we connected over wondering, as two 20-somethings, what our futures might look like in this town. Here's Alina.
I'm Alina Indraca. I'm 28 years old. I'm the youngest of 5 girls, and my family's from Guerrero, Mexico. My sisters and I all live here in Jackson, Wyoming. I was born in San Diego, California, but I was raised in Jackson pretty much my whole life. My parents and I and my sisters moved from San Diego in '96. So I actually went to kindergarten and all the way through high school in Jackson. My childhood here was awesome. I don't think I would have wanted, to grow up anywhere else. It was so much different. It's more different than it is now. You could probably feel more of that Western feel to the town and, like a small, cozy town. I think at that time, it was only like my family and maybe 2 or 3 other Mexican families living in Jackson at the time. I'm sure there was many more over the past in like Victor or Driggs, Idaho. Going to school here was, very different to what it looks like now. I remember having an ESL teacher walking around with me in my classes because there weren't many people who were bilingual at the time. When I graduated from Jackson Hole High School, I went to play soccer in Santa Cruz at Cabrillo College, but just due to, economic struggles, I wasn't able to finish. So I decided to come back home, and I've pretty much been home ever since.
Lina told us about how she's seen Latino communities in Jackson grow and change over her lifetime so far, as well as what she sees as the main challenges facing members of these communities.
The Latino culture shows up in Jackson in many ways, from customer service to hospitality to restaurants. It's a huge population that takes up most of the workforce in this town. Back in the 90s, there was not a big population, maybe until, I would say maybe like early 2000s. People slowly started coming here, and most of the Latino population that lives in Jackson is from a particular state in Mexico called Tlaxcala. My family and I are not from Tlaxcala. We are actually from the state of Guerrero, Mexico, which is on the south coast of Mexico. Some of the challenges that I see members facing here from the Latino population is one, the obvious language barrier. Although a lot of people who, like staff are bilingual, I think there's still a huge need of interpreters in almost every field. Also, affordable housing is a huge barrier here, and affordable childcare. So most people are working, 2 to 3 jobs to be able to afford their rent or able to afford childcare if their children are not in school. So it can be complicated to coordinate and have a simple, 9 to 5 job even. It can be challenging for a lot of families here.
From Alina's perspective, COVID was a huge shock to many Latino community members, and a significant eye-opener for members of the Jackson community who might have been unaware of the reality that so many people here are just scraping by. With so many people already working 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet and pay for rent, losing even one of these jobs because of the pandemic could tip an already precarious balance over the edge. For some people, paid time off wasn't an option because of the nature of their work. And for others, applying for unemployment benefits wasn't possible because of their immigration status. Here's Alina on how all of these challenges have added up during the pandemic.
A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck because most of their check goes towards rent. And so they're left with a little bit of money to work with. So food, access, gas, electric, everything that you need, was very crucial to many people, and not just the Latino, but not being able to have those additional resources was crucial.
Alina has been up close and personal with these challenges through her work with 122, which has become a lot more visible in Jackson because of its COVID relief program, 22 Helps. 22 Helps has raised and redistributed more than $1 million to help community members in need with rent, groceries, and essential medicines. For any listeners who might not be familiar with 122, Alina outlines the history of the organization, the work it does today, and reflects on how that work is, in large part, fueled by the pretty unique amount of wealth and generosity located here in Jackson.
So 122 is a result of a merger from 3 previous entities, one being El Puente, which was mostly medical interpretive services, and the Community Resource Center, which was just a general community resource center, and the third one being the Latino Resource Center. So we all merged in, I want to say 2016, I believe. We kind of realized that we were all trying to serve a certain group of people here, and they thought it was a better idea to join because we all just wanted to essentially just offer resources to those members who maybe struggle a little more than others. But 122's mission is pretty much to have those resources available to a thriving and more diverse community. We had a lot of people apply for our financial relief, which we live in a community that's very generous compared to other cities. I can't imagine being in quarantine in a city. We were receiving calls from all over the place, not just Jackson, but like different states, because they would see our page and realize that we were helping out a lot of people during this time. We're really grateful to live in a community that's very, again, generous and willing to help each other.
Hearing Alina reflect on the generosity of the Jackson community made me think of our interview a while back with Justin Farrell, the author of Billionaire Wilderness. We talked to Justin about how the majority of the ultra-wealthy philanthropy here is funneled toward the arts and conservation, rather than toward social services and addressing issues like affordable housing, food insecurity, or even climate change. And although sometimes it feels a little weird to point to some potential silver linings of COVID, I can't help but hope that 122's 22 Helps program and the outpouring of community support will, in some way, push the needle of the norm of philanthropic giving a little closer to supporting community members most affected by systemic inequalities and the unequal distribution of wealth and structures of support in our country. But like most things right now, it feels hard to predict what the future will hold. Still, it makes me feel a little bit hopeful. Speaking of the future, Lina told us what steps could be taken or are being taken to make Jackson a more inclusive, safe, and accessible place for Latino community members. Here's what she had to say.
There are so many great organizations who, are doing their own thing, but also trying to be inclusive of the Latino population. And I think that's great. That's a great starting point, is to just simply get the word out and even have some of their flyers translated into Spanish. Something so simple like that could really bring people together. I feel like maybe some of us are a little shy to attend some of the events that go around in town. Jackson's a beautiful place for recreational sports, and so maybe you might not see a lot of people at, skiing or hiking or, I remember when I was little, my parents and I and my sisters, we only went into Yellowstone Park like once or twice. And I wasn't able to explore the parks until like my early 20s. It's kind of crazy to think about that, and living in such a beautiful place. But yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of people trying to be more inclusive. I'm just not really sure what else we can do to reach the Latino community, because I feel like a lot of organizations are trying. It's just such a complex town, and most people are working, or they're not used to doing those types of events, or it can be education, and so maybe more education outreach should be done, or would be helpful.
As our interview was wrapping up, I was curious about what Alina's relationship with Jackson might look like moving forward. Was she trying to settle down? Did she want to go somewhere else? And how did her hopes for her future interact with the difficulty of finding permanent housing in this community?
I think that, and I'm sure people my age or my classmates who I went to school with can relate, I have this like love and hate relationship with Jackson. Obviously, I love it because I grew up here and my family's here. But at one point, when I was younger, I was kind of tired of it. I didn't want to stay in a place that maybe didn't offer. There just wasn't much going on, I think, and I wanted more, and I thought it'd be good to leave. And the thing about Jackson is that it's so, I don't know, it's just, besides the beauty of it, that never goes away. There are so many great resources that I never even knew about growing up here. Those are the things that kind of want to keep you going. Thankfully, I'm better established now that I'm older. I was able to find housing. I was able to find a good job, and it's definitely like connections to, if you've been here a while, about this and that, or who runs that, and so it tends to be a little easier if you have been here for a while to stay here and be ultimately doing a little better. But if you just arrived and don't know the area very well, or don't know where to go for certain things, and I could definitely see that being challenging. Do I want to stay here? I don't. I think that I've accepted the fact that it's a possibility, but it's not my first choice, because you look at like housing, like when will I ever be able to afford a house here? Which is why many people are being pushed out to south of town or over the pass for just housing, but still work here. So you take a look at that, financially, it's not maybe the best, I guess. I'd rather have a big house somewhere warm. Ironically, I'm not a huge fan of the winters here. So that's another reason why I don't, it's up in the air for sure. I don't know if I'll be here forever, but I know that my family will, so I can always come back if I ever leave again.
Support for Yonder Lies comes from Wildlife Expeditions of Teton Science Schools. For over 20 years, Wildlife Expeditions has been leading educational wildlife tours in Jackson Hole, Grand Teton, and Yellowstone National Parks. To see wildlife and support education, visit wildlifeexpeditions.org. Having the opportunity to talk with Alina really made me think about what can be done to make Jackson a more inclusive and accessible place to live for Latino community members. Certainly, we need more affordable renting and homeowning options, more affordable childcare options, and more resources to dissolve language barriers. There really wasn't anyone better to talk to about questions of language, translation, and accessibility than our next guest, Lina. Lina was generous to take a little time out of her workday at the Teton Literacy Center to talk. To some, the start of her story might feel pretty familiar. A couple months in town, turning into years and years. Here's Lina on how she ended up in Jackson.
So my name is Lina Collado. I am from Puerto Rico, from Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. I came to Jackson in 2013. I'm a film major. I had heard a lot about the Jackson Hole Wildlife Film Festival, which at that point is what the name was. It's different now. And I connected with the gals that worked there through couch surfing because I decided to come here on a road trip. And that's how I later learned they did a fellowship position, which I was able to then apply for. I got in, and that's kind of how I came here for just 7 months. And then I obviously loved it, very similar to many different stories of people coming to Jackson after being here for 7 months. That's when the economy in Puerto Rico actually started crashing. So I didn't really have anything to go back home to at that point in terms of employment or possibilities of income. So I decided to stay in Jackson and kind of make it work for the next 6 months, working random jobs here and there.
Like many folks who are piecing it together job by job in Jackson, Lina eventually ended up working in the nonprofit world. But luckily for Lina, she was able to find nonprofit work that helped her connect to the Latin community in Jackson.
I worked with several different nonprofits throughout the years. El Puente was one of them, which stopped existing. Now it's 122 as a merger. And with El Puente, I felt like it was the first time that I really connected with the Latin community in Jackson. And I started working and knowing people that spoke Spanish, which really made Jackson appealing because that's the main thing that I was really missing. It's just being able to talk in my language, my first language, being able to just share that with other people. At that point, I was told I was like one of 2 Puerto Ricans. So there wasn't really any other Puerto Ricans in Jackson, which was a little hard because there was no community here established on that. Ironic, especially after Hurricane Maria in 2017. A lot of Puerto Ricans now call Jackson home. I believe it's over 200. I'm not sure if that number has changed with COVID. Very likely it has decreased, but I definitely know that there's way more now than there were. I feel like my name has been thrown around a lot. So now I feel like I know a lot of people and run into a lot of people that in town that speak Spanish. And I'm kind of seen as a bridge between both, between the English-speaking community and the Latino Spanish-speaking community. So that has been really nice, and it has been really empowering for me, I would say, because it makes me feel like I'm actually part of a Latin identity in Jackson, which is something that I wanted to keep, as that is my identity.
Lina has now been working for the Teton Literacy Center for the last 4 years, where she started as a resource manager and teaching ESL to adults. Now Lina manages the Literacy Center's Family Literacy Program. On the weekends, she's still actively pursuing her passion for photography, working on photojournalism pieces, magazine stories, and portrait sessions for weddings, engagements, maternity, the whole 9 yards. And in addition to being a social bridge between the English and Spanish-speaking communities, Lina's used her photography and film experience to bridge the linguistic and representational gap in local media, bringing more awareness to the stories of Puerto Ricans living in Jackson.
I did do a story about this that it's actually in the Jackson Hole magazine of the summer edition, the one with the fish on the front cover. There is a story in there that I wrote and I photographed for the Puerto Ricans in Teton County called Caribbean Cowboys. It's a story that is the first story that the magazine wrote entirely about Latinos. And it's also the first story in the magazine that they wrote in Spanish and English because I translated it for them and I offered it in both languages so that everyone could really read it and understand it. So that is that there's more into who we are and where we are in Jackson as a new community in that article. So you can check it out.
I did check out Lina's article after we hopped off Zoom, and I can't recommend reading it enough. The photographs are really beautiful, and it does a great job of adding nuance to the dominant story often told about Latino communities in Jackson, which tends to focus on Latinos with roots in Mexico. And while it's true that this is the case for a majority of Latinos in Jackson, I wanted to learn more about why is this generalization that all Latinos in Jackson are from Mexico so pervasive? Diversity and identity nested into the term Latino.
I think that's a great question because everyone assumes automatically that the only Latin community here in Jackson is the community that comes from Mexico. And that is far from the truth. Right now, there are so many communities in Jackson from different parts of Latin America, from Peru, from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic. There's a lot of different people from here that I've met throughout the years. And many times it's kind of an assumption then when different organizations or different programs reach out to Latin communities, they just think of the communities that come from Mexico, which, yes, are the vast majority of the Latinos that live in this town, but they do not consist of everyone. So that is, I think, a misconception that a lot of people have in terms of who lives in this town. Obviously, I was very excited for our census this year because that would have shown a more accurate picture of who is really part of our community. I don't know if we're going to get an accurate description just because of COVID and the effects that had on the census and being able to reach everyone. I hope I'm wrong and that we are able to get an accurate picture.
Support for Yonder Lies comes from Think WY, Wyoming Humanities. Wyoming Humanities supports programs, grants, and initiatives in Teton County and across Wyoming that explore history, culture, and the human experience. To learn more about the Wyoming Humanities Council, visit thinkwy.org. Again, that's thinkwy.org.
So, why do people from so many different, often faraway places and cultures come to Jackson? Lina's answer is simple and rooted in job security.
I kind of consider Jackson always like a melting pot. It just brings so many different people from so many different areas. And they mostly come here because of the job opportunities that have. Remember that when they're looking for job opportunities, they're not looking for just a specific kind of job, but just a job that can give them income, that can help them reach goals, family goals, individual goals that they might have, as well as the hopes to be able to offer a better education for their children from the country or place they're leaving and coming to Jackson for. I can say that for Puerto Ricans that are coming to Jackson, 100% of them are because of looking for employment opportunities and being able to increase their income so they can send money home or they can better support their families or give better opportunities for their families.
As we mentioned at the top of the episode, the gap between perception and reality when it comes to awareness about Latino communities on the part of non-Latino community members can be stark and surprising in its starkness. But what's creating this gap? Lina told us where she thinks this gap between perception and reality comes from.
I always get a shock of surprise when I tell people that I live in a place with a lot of other Latinos. And it's because I think we're so kind of in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. And Wyoming is such a state with such little population. There's just not a lot of realization that also in states like Wyoming, like Montana, like different places around the country have a lot of Latino populations. It's very out there in terms of location. It's not easy to get to in terms of how much it costs to get here or how much you have to drive to get here. All those different things just make it a place where people just assume that it's just a lot of cowboys living in Jackson. And when they get here, I feel like a lot of them realize that no, there is a healthy, not only there's a healthy Latino community, there's a healthy community of young people as well, of like people in the ages of like, I would say early 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, that kind of group as well as early 40s. So it's not all people that are coming in their 40s and 50s from different parts of Latin America. Actually, if anything, the Puerto Rican community, most that I've seen are people in their 30s. And then with that misconception, I don't know why, if you were to ask me, like, why is it that people don't know that such a healthy Latino community is living here? I really don't know the answer to that. What I could say is, like what I mentioned, that, there is all these jobs and there's always been jobs. So for people that are the one to work at a ranch, people that want to work in the service industry, for people that want to work in the cleaning service industry as well, there's just a lot of jobs. So that's why I think this has become the place that kind of houses like a melting pot of Latinos.
Lina's point makes a lot of sense. Jackson is a tourist destination, a destination of the ultra-wealthy, and a place where manual labor like construction and landscaping is plentiful. If there are job opportunities, people will come, and there's a lot of jobs here. But getting to Jackson is only one step of the journey. Then there's language barriers, childcare, confusing applications. Lina's no stranger to these challenges, as she helps address them every day at the Teton Literacy Center. Here's Lina on the TLC and the long, long list of amazing work they do to support a thriving community in Jackson.
The main mission of TLC is to have a 100% literate community. And with that mission, we try our best to be kind of the bridge in offering our community ways and programming to be able to read, be able to write, be able to become better versions of themselves, whether that is through professional development, through workshops, through anything that we could connect them with so they could continue to thrive and be a thriving member of our community, not just a member of the community. And with that, everything that we offer is completely free, which is huge in this town. Everything from tutoring that happens once a week with volunteers. I teach English as a second language for the adults, for the parents of the children who attend TLC. And we do everything from resume trainings, interview, like how to hold an interview, how to have more understanding of your financial language in English. Like what does, certain words mean when you go to a bank and you need to open an account, how to better talk to your teacher about your students' progress in English. And my goal is to reduce the need of interpretation. So these parents can actually have a conversation with professionals about their children or about themselves without needing interpreters. Obviously, that gets dicey when you involve the medical industry and they have to go to doctor's appointments and things. And for that, we don't have interpretation in this town right now. So it's only for specific sectors in the community. And then we also have a preschool that runs throughout the entire year to help families who have not been able to get access to pre-kinder because where they're in huge wait lists or other different issues that they might have run that they weren't able to get preschool. And then we also do after-school clubs, and those happen for all elementary schools as well as for the middle school. And for the last 2 years, we've been really working hard in supporting high schoolers in their transition into college and really helping them with what they may need. Again, understanding more of the financial application of going into college. How much will it cost? Can they apply for grants? And we always hold the belief that a parent is a child's first teacher.
Like Alina, Lina reflected on what steps she thought could be taken or are being taken to make Jackson a more inclusive, safe, and accessible space for Latino community members. And if you thought Lina couldn't possibly have another important project on her plate, well, think again.
I do think access to information is probably the most crucial thing we need right now, especially during a pandemic. When COVID first hit, I immediately reached out to the newspaper and I offered my services as a translator because all this information of COVID, it was going out and nothing was in Spanish. And I just felt like we were not only doing ourselves as a community a disservice because we can't control the pandemic if everyone is not on the same page and everyone is not informed accurately on what they need to do in order to protect themselves and their family members. So ever since March, I've been translating on a weekly basis an article for the paper together with Patty Rocha from the library. Like I mentioned, we can't reach a place where we are taking care of each other and all of us if half of us don't understand what is being said. I have been a very big advocate in terms of having access to information in Spanish and in English. That's why I did it for my magazine. That's why a few years back I did an exhibit at the National Museum of Wildlife Art that was focused on Puerto Rico, and it was the first time a large-scale art exhibit was done in Spanish and English in the state, and it was called Somos de Aquí. And it was an exhibit that was completely translated into Spanish and English for anyone that wanted to see it about Puerto Rico. I think that access to information and access in languages that are more than just English is really the first step, not only to make people feel included, but to also illustrate from anyone that might be coming to Jackson that, hey, it is in Spanish because there is a big Latino community in this town. And that's the first step to even take away that misconception that there's no Latinos living here. Because imagine if you just move here and you don't speak English and you grab a free newspaper, which is incredible that it's free, but it's all in English. It's like you can't read it. So there's no point. So it's just, and I don't expect a newspaper to be offered completely in more than one language because it's really hard to do. But the initiative that they started in March, I could not be prouder and could not be more supportive of the News and Guide for doing it, because it really was an amazing first step.
If you haven't already, please rate and subscribe on iTunes or Spotify. And if you'd like to support the show with a small monthly donation, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/yonderlies. That's patreon.com/yonderlies.
Technical support comes from Jackson's community radio station, KHOL 89.1, and the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative. A big thanks to the Jackson Hole Historical Society for providing access to hours of archival audio. Special shout out to Doug Haberman for our theme music and Becca Hold-Hewson for our beautiful cover art.